Monty Python's Tunisian Holiday, My Life with Brian, by Kim Howard Johnson. Read by Johnny Heller and Simon Vance. Copyright 2008 by Kim Howard Johnson. Forwards, copyright 2008 by Michael Palin, John Cleese, Eric Idle, and Terry Jones. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Thomas Dunn Books, an imprint of St. Martin's Press, and was produced in the year 2008 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto.
Forward by Michael Palin. If anyone can remember more about making Life of Brian than me, it's Kim Howard Johnson. He came, he saw, he got into costume. While the rest of us were fighting to upstage each other, Howard had a notebook hidden in his toga. And he was that rare thing, a Python fan who could spell. He didn't miss a trick. Not for him the long lunches after a stoning, or the card schools after crucifixion. Kim Howard Johnson saw it all happen, and his diary fills those gaps that none of the rest of us can remember. Or maybe daren't remember. An essential tool for Python nuts. An apology for not reading this book before writing the foreword. John Cleese. Of all the books I am planning to read in my dotage, there is none I am more looking forward to than Monty Python's Tunisian Holiday. This is truly one of the finest volumes I've seen in years. Beautiful binding, all the pages held securely in place in the proper order, a real feast for the eyes, and a magnificent product of the bookbinder's art. Let your eyes lovingly gaze over each and every letter of the alphabet, assembled in neatly ordered rows in the traditional manner. Yes, this one surely looks like a winner. And did I mention the fabulous photographs, both in black and white and colour? The entire package is bathed in the aroma of the finest India ink. Flip through the pages and listen to the paper rustle. Run your fingers leisurely over each and every page. Taste the glossy goodness of the dust jacket. Yes, this volume is truly a feast for all the senses. Of all the books I'd love to read as soon as I get a spare moment, Monty Python's Tunisian Holiday is undoubtedly in the top 1,000. But then, why wouldn't it be? Not only does Howard Johnson know more about Python than anyone outside of the IRS, he was in Tunisia for most of the filming of Life of Brian, and is the only person who captured every thoughtless remark, heated exchange, embarrassing detail, petty insult, and spiteful act of indifference. So forgive me for not starting this book before writing the foreword, but I've got a chiropractor's appointment in 20 minutes. I leave you in the highly capable hands of Howard, who I know will take very good care of you. Foreword by Eric Idle. A word about the author. Kim Howard Johnson was invented by Graham Chapman during an idle moment on the set of Life of Brian. "Let's invent a person," he said. "An American," said Cleese. "An American fan from the Midwest," chimed in Palin, "who keeps a daily diary of Python filming, and then doesn't publish it for years and years." "Who would believe that?" I remember muttering disgruntledly. "Oh, you'd be surprised," said Terry Gilliam, helping himself to some more of my per diem. "Americans can be very naive. They'll buy almost anything." Terry Jones was away checking out asses, and it was only later, over dinner, after he had cast a slim young donkey, that we told him we had made up a character called Kim Howard Johnson. In fact, it was he who added the quote marks. How we laughed! And each day we'd make up stuff this person would write about us. Indeed, so well was Howard written that he went on to have quite a successful career in America, and at one time he even worked for John Cleese as a tax dodge. So ridiculous has the internet become that nowadays people take this character seriously, not only believing he is real, but actually suggesting he worked with the late Del Close, a character clearly made up by Robin Williams during an improv night in Chicago. But you and I know better about American sources and reminiscences and Fox Newses, and will not easily be taken in by such an evident hoax. As your American president might have said, if he could ever string enough words together, just because something isn't true is no reason not to believe in it. I think this might be a watchword for our times. That and always look on the bright side. Forward by Terry Jones. I used to play a lot of rugby football when I was at school. All I can remember about it was that it involved a lot of running around, falling in the mud, and shouting. I don't know what the shouting was for, but it seemed to go with the game. At the end of every match, we'd be in the showers, and the other boys would be talking through the game. You know that moment when Tim Hall got the ball to green and he beat 2 men before he was brought down, etc., etc. I would listen in disbelief. I couldn't remember a single event in the game, not even the moment when my nose got broken. It was just a blur of running around, falling in the mud, and shouting. Well, that's more or less how I feel about filming Life of Brian. There wasn't quite so much falling in the mud. In fact, considering the weather conditions in Tunisia, there was no falling in the mud at all, except at the end, when there was a storm during the shooting of the dance routine on the crosses. So it's wonderful to have Kim Howard Johnson's first-hand account of what was really happening behind the scenes, while I was running around, not falling in any mud, and shouting. As far as I'm concerned, Howard's diary is a treasure trove not only of forgotten things, but of things I didn't know in the first place. For instance, I had no idea that Mike Palin shaved in the morning when he was playing a Roman, but shaved the night before if he were playing a peasant. This is a unique record of what it was like to participate in making a Python movie. And since there won't be any more, Howard's diaries are unrepeatable.
Preface. It has long been a tradition for American boys to dream of running away and joining the circus. I was fortunate enough to make that dream come true. In this case, however, I ran off to England and North Africa to join Monty Python's Flying Circus. Not what the traditionalists intended, perhaps, but working with Monty Python in Tunisia during the filming of Life of Brian offered more than could be fit into 3 rings. My interest in Python started innocently enough. One lazy Sunday evening, I noted a listing for Chicago's public television station for a program called Monty Python's Flying Circus, and turned to it with mild curiosity. Within 5 minutes I had swallowed the hook. In the weeks that followed, I delighted in transvestite lumberjacks, sheep that thought they were birds, killer cars, the Spanish Inquisition, and 1,001 other brilliant bits of inspired lunacy far beyond the usual drivel on the American networks. I eagerly devoured the scant information I could find about Python, and soon learned it was the product of 5 Englishmen, Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Eric Idle, Terry Jones, and Michael Palin, along with animator and lone American Terry Gilliam. I naturally drove to Chicago for the opening of their first original film, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when I discovered that Terry Jones and Graham Chapman would be appearing live at the theater. I was thrilled to meet them, albeit briefly, and resolved to keep in touch. I started a correspondence, admittedly mostly one way, with Terry Jones, and in April of 1976 he invited me out to New York, where he and the rest of Python would be performing live at City Center. Even though I couldn't afford it and couldn't take the time off, I also couldn't let a chance like this go by. Terry seemed to remember me when I went backstage between shows, and he introduced me to all of the others, making for an evening I'd never forget. Becoming increasingly devoted to Python, I resolved to collect all the information that I could for a Monty Python fanzine. I planned to do an index to all the Python TV shows, records, books, and films, as well as any other Python projects, whether as a group or individually. Even though he wasn't terribly familiar with me, Michael Palin agreed to do a telephone interview when I tracked him down while he was hosting Saturday Night Live. Thanks to the interview, the first of the 3 volumes sold quite well, and I was encouraged enough to send copies to all of the Pythons. To say that I was overjoyed by their responses would be an understatement. I'd been considering a trip to London for some time, but put it off due to issues of time and money until I received a letter from Michael. In his closing comments, he told me to be sure to stop by if I did decide to make the trip. I booked the flight the next day. It proved to be a most worthwhile week. I was able to meet and spend time with nearly all of the Pythons. I stayed much of the week at Graham's house, aside from an overnight trip to Wales to visit Terry Jones and his family while they were on vacation. The Pythons were due to fly off to Tunisia the next month to shoot Life of Brian, so I heard a great deal about it, from talking both to them and their manager, Anne Henshaw, now Ann James. Terry Jones had even given me the script and storyboards to read. After I arrived home in Illinois, I determined I would find a way to make it to Tunisia for the filming. The results are in the following recording. They represent more than 5 weeks of Monty Python at work and at play, on location for the filming of Life of Brian. I've tried to include everything, just as it happened, the highs, the lows, and most of all the fun. If you can feel just some of the sense of excitement I felt at being a small part of the Brian experience, then I've succeeded. My thanks go out to Ann James, the cast and crew of Brian, and my parents, to Laurie and Morgan, who many years later encouraged me to share my diary with the world, and of course to Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Terry Gilliam, Eric Idle, Terry Jones, and Michael Palin. Life of Brian, a synopsis. A star leads 3 wise men to Bethlehem, where they discover a rat-bag mother and her newborn child. She seems quite interested in their gifts of gold and frankincense, and is pleased to be told her son is the Messiah. But the 3 wise men discover they're at the wrong stable, so they reclaim their gifts and go worshipping at the correct one. The opening credits are accompanied by a title song in lavish Terry Gilliam animation. In Judea, A.D. 33, Jesus preaches to a large crowd. In the back, people are straining to hear, misinterpreting lines as, "Blessed are the cheesemakers," and "Blessed are the Greek." When a fistfight breaks out, Brian and his ratbag mother, Mandy, leave, but not before Brian spots and is immediately smitten by Judith, who is part of a group of revolutionaries. Brian and Mandy decide to go to a nearby stoning. They purchase stones and a false beard for Mandy, as women are not allowed at stonings. The crowd, most of whom are women in false beards, are to stone a man for saying the word Jehovah. But it all goes awry when the charges against him are read. As they leave, Brian and Mandy are accosted by an ungrateful ex-leper who lost his livelihood when he was cured by Jesus. Brian complains about the Romans who occupy the country, only to learn that his own father was a Roman. While selling snacks at the Colosseum, Brian encounters Judith, who is with the People's Front of Judea. He begs them to let him join the revolutionary group and is assigned to paint "Romans Go Home" on the wall of Pilate's palace. That evening he's caught painting the slogan by a centurion, who discovers his grammatical errors. As a punishment, he's ordered to write "Romans Go Home" on the wall 100 times. This delights the revolutionaries. The People's Front of Judea plots to rid their country of Romans, though asking, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" proves counterproductive. The revolutionaries raid the palace to kidnap Pilate's wife, only to discover a rival group has the same idea. Brian is captured and thrown into a dungeon with a surprisingly cheerful prisoner called Ben. Brian is brought before Pilate, who has an unfortunate speech impediment, and escapes while the soldiers are laughing at Pilate. Brian falls from a tower, takes a brief ride on a spaceship, and crashes near a marketplace. To escape the Roman soldiers, he tries to buy a beard, but has problems when he refuses to haggle. Brian flees to the revolutionaries' headquarters. When soldiers arrive to search the building, Brian hides on a balcony. It collapses, and he falls onto a wall lined with prophets. He pretends to be one of the prophets speaking to the crowd, but soon attracts a sizable following who won't leave him alone. He flees, and they're convinced he is the Messiah. After Brian spends the night with Judith, he discovers a huge group of followers has gathered outside his window, which pleases neither Brian nor his mother. The revolutionaries are quick to exploit Brian's status as the Messiah for their own purposes, as are King Otto and his suicide squad. Brian's arrested and sentenced to be crucified. Judith tries to rouse the revolutionaries to save him, but they're more concerned with his status as a martyr. Pilate and his friend Biggest Dickus address the crowd for Passover. The people roar at their speech impediments, but with the help of Judith, Pilate orders Brian to be released. The centurion arrives at the scene of the crucifixions, but when all of the prisoners claim to be Brian, he releases the wrong man. As Brian hangs from the cross, the revolutionaries salute him, and his mother berates him before all of them join in singing, "Always look on the bright side of life." Wednesday through Thursday, September 13th through 14th, 1978. The journey to Monastir, in which I am immersed in all things Tunisian. I arrived at the airport in Tunis in the middle of the afternoon after nearly 18 hours of non-stop flying. Since there was no direct flight from Chicago to Tunis, I had a brief layover in the morning in Amsterdam. It was too brief for any sightseeing, but there was plenty of time for a Heineken. It seemed like it should taste better in its motherland, but I didn't notice much difference. As I boarded my flight, I said a silent goodbye to Western civilization as I knew it. The KLM plane was only half full, but seemed to be carrying a most varied assortment of passengers. There were Arab mothers with screaming babies, Frenchmen arguing with each other, excited English tourists, and businessmen of varying nationalities who seemed to regard the flight as an inconvenient, if necessary, part of the job. The biggest adjustment for me was the lack of a common language, though everyone else on the plane seemed to take it all in stride. The pilot bravely attempted to struggle through the flight announcements in Arabic, French, Dutch, and English, and from the looks of the other passengers, he was barely understandable in any of them. "Les Alpes is above us," he announced, prompting some of the English passengers to glance outside nervously. No announcement was needed, however, when we reached the coastline of Africa. The sky and the sea were both perfect shades of blue, and there wasn't a cloud in sight. The sand along the shore was speckled with a few droppings of green. It was oppressively hot down there, no doubt, but from our vantage point, there wasn't a photo in the world that could do it justice. We continued inland, and it wasn't long before we reached Tunis. In fact, we were nearly on top of it before anyone spotted it, largely due to the lack of skyscrapers and modern buildings. We circled the city once before touching down at the airport, which was a few miles off from the city itself. Tunis is the capital and largest city in Tunisia, located right on the Mediterranean across from Italy, and is, like most Tunisian cities, a curious mixture of the old and new. According to what I had read on the subject, Tunisia is considered to be the most modern of the North African countries, and its major industry is tourism. Most of the Python filming would be done in the city of Monastir, about a 4-hour drive along the coast south from Tunis. The Pythons were already down there preparing. I had arranged for a ride with a group flying in from London, but they wouldn't be arriving until the next day, so it meant spending the night in Tunis. I briefly contemplated spending the night in the airport until the next group arrived, deciding against it when it appeared the place would probably close up completely around 9 that night. The airport was far from any hotel, so I stopped at an office designated Tunisian Tourist Information, a rather shabby room with 3 somewhat disheveled Tunisian men in it. After a bit of gesturing, one of them wrote out Bus 35 and Hotel Capitol. When the bus arrived, it was packed with Tunisians, and I felt slightly intimidated. Arabic is a harsh, guttural language which sounds aggressive no matter what's being said, and it sounded a bit like everyone on the bus was arguing with someone else. Thanks to the help of 2 boys who spoke English, I got off at the right stop for the Hotel Capitol, which was a couple of blocks ahead. I'd still not noticed many tall buildings. Nearly all of the structures seemed to be either stone or cement, and the exterior of nearly every building was painted white or off-white, which I vaguely recalled as having a religious connotation. The outskirts of the city had been sparsely populated, but here in the center of town more and more people crowded the streets. They made for an interesting picture. Some were in traditional dress with white robes. Most of the older women still wore veils across their faces, but I occasionally spotted a younger girl in blue jeans and a sweater. The Hotel Capitol was a small doorway hidden between larger buildings, which led into an old run-down lobby badly in need of a coat of paint. I was so tired by that time, however, that if there hadn't been an open room, I would have gone outside and napped in the alley. I pried the desk clerk away from his card game, and he showed me to an ancient, creaking elevator that was nevertheless bigger than the lobby. He left, and I collapsed onto the bed for 14 straight hours of sleep. I rose around 9 o'clock and found I had to fight the cockroaches for the shower, which is one of the filthiest I had ever seen. I was glad to pack my bags and wait for a bus to the airport. As I walked down the street to the bus stop, I passed vendors and street peddlers pushing their wares. I was tempted by the smell of freshly baked bread and bits of fried dough displayed appetizingly but unsanitarily on cracked formica counters. Other merchants carried fruit, while another local businessman pushed a cart full of fish that had undoubtedly been pulled from the sea this morning. I was a little leery of the health standards that were undoubtedly in effect, but out of necessity I became a little more liberal, though I drew a line at drinking the water. The bus pulled up shortly. It was much less crowded than yesterday, which made for a more relaxing ride to the airport. As the flight from London wasn't scheduled to arrive until mid-afternoon, I decided to sit back and read while I waited. I opened my pack and found the Gulag Archipelago sitting on top. I found the rather graphic descriptions of the Soviet police cells a little too unsettling, though, and decided to write a few postcards instead. As the time of my arrival drew closer, I wandered over to the gate. As I waited, a young, apparently European girl asked me a question in French. When I indicated my ignorance, she broke into a smile. "Oh, you speak English." "I'm sorry, but I couldn't tell," she said in a distinctly American voice, the first I had heard in the past 24 hours. Her name was Carol, and she was originally from Connecticut. Now with the Peace Corps, she had been living in Tunis as an American teacher, but her 2-year stint was almost up, and she'd be returning to the States soon. Since the London plane was delayed, we had a nice chat in which she gave me a few helpful hints about living in Tunisia. The plane touched down exactly an hour behind schedule, which seemed to be the accepted norm with Tunis Air, so I began watching for arrivals. I had been informed to watch for a driver holding a Monty Python sign. The only person I knew who would be arriving was Bernard McKenna, a friend and writing partner of Graham Chapman, whom I had met the previous month in London. He had co-written The Odd Job, a film Graham had produced and starred in. I had first encountered him in a pub where he was meeting with Graham about the film. At the time, Bernard explained that he had just returned from visiting his mother in Scotland. "I had to go up and tell her about my divorce," explained Bernard. "My mother was a bit old-fashioned and didn't sit very well with her. Fortunately, though, I think I've probably dropped all the big bombshells on her that are possible by now." He went on to explain that his brother, a policeman, met him at the airport. He offered to carry one of my bags, and as we were walking along, I asked him if it was illegal for policemen to possess contraband. He said certainly. We walked along farther, and then I stopped him and said, "You're breaking the law," and nodded to my bag. My brother was a bit nervous anyway, looked pale, but carried on. Pretty soon he stopped and said, "Yes, but I wasn't knowingly possessing contraband." We started walking again, and as he was starting to calm down, I said, "You're now knowingly possessing contraband." A couple of days after that, Bernard had to stop by Graham's house for a bit of doctoring, as he had injured his arm when he slipped and fell in a public lavatory. I saw some of the passengers lining up at check-in from the London flight and spotted Bernard's bandaged arm, clutching a bag of duty-free cigarette cartons and bottles. I heard a sound behind me and turned. One of the Tunisian drivers was holding up a sign reading, "Monty Python Group." It made an interesting sight in the midst of all the robes and veils, an incongruity grand enough to deserve a place on the Python TV series. Bernard seemed startled to see me, but quickly recovered and introduced me to Tanya, a tanned, attractive brunette. I recalled that Anne Henshaw had mentioned that Eric Idle's girlfriend would be with the group. Tanya told me she was originally from a suburb of Chicago, not terribly far from my own hometown. Small world indeed. We wandered over to the rest of the group, where I was assigned to the Hotel Ruspina. The others headed downstairs to pick up luggage and equipment, and then we all stood waiting for the cars and van that would transport us to Monastir. As I introduced myself, I learned that most of the dozen or so people with the group were either crew members or makeup girls, though Bernard was one of the actors. I was assigned to the van, which was loaded with everyone who couldn't squeeze into the cars, and we started on the ride south. I was walking with Cantias, one of the makeup ladies, who was describing her work the previous week on the Sex Pistols film, when someone behind me called out, "Camels! Camels!" Another of the makeup crew, Susie Freer, visibly excited, pointed out a pair of camels in a field alongside the road, the first ones we'd seen since our arrival. I was sure they wouldn't be the last, though deep down I had to admit I was a little excited to see them. "Do you think there'll be lots of them down there?" Susie asked excitedly. Everyone shrugged, and she kept a vigil at the window. We drove on past miles and miles of date trees, barren fields with the occasional donkey or camel, and even a few vineyards. Even though Tunisia is a Muslim country, it apparently has a fairly healthy wine industry. As we continued, a few voices in the back began to urge our Tunisian driver to stop for tea. Even though we were seemingly in the middle of nowhere, he indicated that he knew of a place. A few minutes later he pulled off the main highway and onto a dusty gravel road which led to the only building in sight for miles. It was reminiscent of the kind of small gas station general store usually found only in a rustic backwater town, but we all piled out and sat at some tables in front of the building while the driver ordered for us. There was no tea, so we had to settle for Tunisian coffee with goat's milk in place of cream. We sat outside as the sun fell and the temperature began to drop. In the distance we could see an occasional car or truck on the main road. "I wonder if we'll get to see any camels close up?" asked Susie. The remainder of the drive was uneventful, and most of us either slept or tried to sleep. The bumpy roads and our driver's habits behind the wheel stopped me from dozing off, however. Our driver was fearless, passing cars casually and barely making it back into our lane in time. From what I've observed so far, Tunisian drivers seem to be a bit mad behind the wheel, and I find it amazing that the streets and highways aren't littered with casualties. The near constant honking of horns is also unsettling. The natives seem to like the noise and lay on their horns at every opportunity. If a car is passing them, they honk. If they want a car to pass them, they honk. They honk when they're angry, but they also honk just to say hello. At last we pulled up to the Hotel Raspina, which would be my home for the next few weeks. A few of the other crew members who were also staying there piled out along with me, and I found out my luggage had been put on the other van, the one that had gone on into town. I received a half-hearted promise that it would be brought over from the other hotel, so I went in to register. At the front desk, two of the unit electricians were trying to change rooms. The desk clerk was trying to explain, in his broken English, that he'd like them to share a room for the night until he could find another single. The two seemed strongly opposed to the suggestion, so he was attempting to pacify them. At the same time, he was trying to find the manager, who allegedly spoke much better English. The Raspina itself was a nice, modern hotel, and except for the staff of natives and local souvenirs, it looked much like any modern resort in America. The lobby was small, but still very nice, and at the moment it was populated by a group of older German tourists animatedly chattering away on some topic of grave concern. I was able to register without any problem and wasn't asked to share my room, so I headed to the end of the hallway to room 145. I unlocked the door and found a closet full of clothes and a half-eaten watermelon. When I tried to explain to the allegedly English-speaking manager, things grew even more confusing. Through the protests of some of the crew members and some sort of minor miracle, they were able to realize that I needed another room. This time I was assigned to room 153, which was safely uninhabited. There was another plate of watermelon, this one uneaten, waiting for me, so I ate a little and started preparing for bed. Suddenly the phone rang. Who could be calling me here? Nobody even knew which room I was in. I answered and was immediately hit with an onslaught of French. Could you say it in English, please? English? I asked innocently. Oui, monsieur, the voice replied, then hung up. As I tried to figure out what had just occurred, there was a knock on my door. I opened it somewhat cautiously, only to find a short, plump bellboy with a silly grin on his face and my bags under his arms. Amazed and relieved at their prompt arrival, I didn't ask any questions. I took them from the bellboy, and he remained there with the same sappy grin. With no comprehension of Tunisian currency, I handed him a few coins. He took on a rather pained expression, so I handed him a few more, and indicated that that was all. He pasted on the grin again, thanked me, and left. Friday, September 15th. Final rehearsal in which the players are gathered. I had arranged to catch a ride into town with some of the grips and sparks. This is what the construction and electrical crews are called. I woke up at 7:30 for an unsuccessful attempt at phoning home. I'd been told that it was about a 15-minute ride into town. The Tunisian drivers usually seem to shave several minutes off that. Traveling the well-paved roads, we passed by a couple of other resort hotels on the way in. Not far from the Raspina was the Monastir Airport, which was rather small but looked shiny and brand new from the road. Small clumps of grass and occasional palm trees dotted the roadside. The sandy soil didn't seem to allow a great variety of vegetation. As I spotted the city of Monastir up ahead, one of the grips who had been here for a couple of weeks pointed out a long wall on our left. "The President of Tunisia has his summer house inside there," he informed us. "President Bourguiba is really old and sick right now. They've got him in a hospital in Paris, hooked up to some machine, but he always used to come here for a couple of weeks every summer. This is his hometown." We came to the end of the wall, and I looked inside the front gates, but couldn't see anything but trees. We drove into the town, and they dropped me off a couple of blocks away from the Hotel Sidi Mansour, and continued on to the location. The Sidi Mansour is acting as the base of operations for the unit, as it's very near the principal location. I had to walk through part of downtown Monastir, a curious combination of the old and new. It was slowly being modernized under President Bourguiba's direction, and he seems to want to make it a showplace. The local people seem to really care about him, not just because he's a hometown boy, but also because he's really tried to help them. Tunisia was a French colony until 1956 when Bourguiba took over, and for many, he's the only ruler they've ever known. His presence is every...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?